The rushing waters of the canyon creek roared beneath the wooden bridge as Rebecca Summers gripped the reins of her wagon with white knuckles. The thunderous crack of splintering would drowning out her terrified scream. It was supposed to be a routine crossing, a simple journey to her new life in Silver Creek, but fate had other plans on this spring morning in 1876. The wagon lurched violently, tilting at a sickening angle as the bridge's ancient support beams surrendered to years of weathering and neglect. Rebecca felt her world tipping, the loaded wagon dragging her toward the churning waters below. Her possessions, all she had left after selling her father's farm back east, slid toward the edge of the wagon bed, crashing against the wooden sides. Jump. The command came from somewhere behind her, a deep voice barely audible over the roar of the water and the cracking of the bridge. But Rebecca was frozen in fear, her hands still clutching the reins as her horses whinnied in panic, their hooves scrambling for purchase on the collapsing planks. The wagon teetered precariously, half suspended over the raging creek 30 feet below. Suddenly, a figure appeared beside her, a man in dusty riding clothes, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. Without hesitation, he wrapped a strong arm around her waist and pulled her from the driver's seat just as the wagon broke free of the remaining bridge supports. "Hold on," he shouted, lifting her bodily from the doomed vehicle. Rebecca caught one last glimpse of her wagon containing everything she owned in the world as it plummeted into the swollen creek. The horses, mercifully, had broken free of their harnesses and were scrambling back toward solid ground. Her rescuer moved with surprising agility, leaping from one stable section of bridge to another, carrying her as if she weighed nothing. When they reached the muddy bank, he set her down gently, both of them breathing hard from the narrow escape. "You all right, madam?" he asked, pushing back his hat to reveal a face weathered by sun and wind, with kind blue eyes that studied her with concern. "Yes," Rebecca managed, though her voice trembled. "Thanks to you, Mr. Blackwell," he replied. "Beau Blackwell, ranch foreman at the Triple R just north of here." Rebecca brushed dirt from her travel-worn dress, painfully aware of how bedraggled she must look. "Rebecca Summers," she said, offering her hand. "I'm much obliged to you, Mr. Blackwell. You saved my life." Beau's calloused hand enveloped hers in a gentle grip. "Just doing what needed doing, Miss Summers." His eyes drifted to the swirling waters below, where her wagon had already been swept downstream, only the canvas top still visible above the surface. "Though I'm mighty sorry about your things." The reality of her situation suddenly crashed down on Rebecca. She was alone in unfamiliar territory, with no transportation, no possessions save the clothes on her back, and no money except for the few dollars in her pocket. Tears welled in her eyes despite her best efforts to maintain composure. "I don't know what I'm going to do," she whispered. "Everything I owned was in that wagon." Beau shifted uncomfortably, clearly unaccustomed to dealing with a distressed woman. "Where were you headed, if you don't mind my asking?" "Silver Creek," Rebecca replied, wiping away a tear with the back of her hand. "I'm to be the new schoolteacher there. They're expecting me next week." Beau nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Silver Creek's about 30 miles west of here. No way to walk it, especially not with the coyotes and bandits that roam these parts." He paused, seemingly coming to a decision. "The Triple R is just 5 miles north. My boss, Mr. Richardson, is a fair man. We can get you situated there until we figure something out." Rebecca hesitated. Going alone to a strange ranch with a man she just met went against everything her father had taught her about propriety. But what choice did she have? Night would fall soon, and she couldn't stay by the creek hoping for another traveler to pass by. "I would be grateful for the assistance," she finally said. Beau whistled, and a handsome chestnut stallion trotted over from where it had been grazing nearby. "This is Rusty," he said, patting the horse's neck. "He's sturdy enough to carry us both to the ranch." He helped Rebecca mount, then swung up behind her. She stiffened slightly at the proximity, unused to being this close to a man who wasn't family. But as they began the journey north, the steady rhythm of the horse's gait and Beau's respectful distance as much as possible while sharing a saddle put her somewhat at ease. "Have you been in these parts long, Mr. Blackwell?" she asked, trying to distract herself from both her predicament and the warmth of his chest against her back. "Born and raised in Montana Territory," he replied. "Been working cattle since I was old enough to sit a horse. The last 8 years at the Triple R." "And what brings a Massachusetts girl like yourself all the way out to Silver Creek?" he asked after a moment of silence. Rebecca raised an eyebrow, surprised. "How did you know I'm from Massachusetts?" she felt rather than saw his smile. "Your accent reminds me of my mother. She was from Boston." "Springfield," Rebecca corrected. "My father was a teacher there. After he passed last winter, there wasn't much keeping me in the East. When I saw the advertisement for a schoolteacher in Silver Creek, it seemed like a sign, a chance for a fresh start." Beau was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry about your father." "Thank you," Rebecca murmured, unexpectedly touched by the simple sincerity in his voice. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the landscape opening up before them, rolling hills dotted with sagebrush and the occasional stunted tree. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the terrain, turning the dusty ground golden. "There it is," Beau said eventually, pointing to a collection of buildings nestled in a shallow valley ahead. "The Triple R." As they approached, Rebecca could make out a large main house, a bunkhouse, stables, and various outbuildings, all surrounded by corrals and fencing. Several cowboys were visible, going about their evening chores. They looked up curiously as Beau rode in with Rebecca. "Beau, who have you got there?" called a gray-haired man emerging from the main house. "This is Miss Summers, Mr. Richardson," Beau replied as he dismounted and helped Rebecca down. Her wagon went into Canyon Creek when the bridge collapsed, lost everything she had. Rebecca straightened her skirts and offered her hand to the ranch owner. "Rebecca Summers, sir, I apologize for imposing on your hospitality." Richard Richardson, a stout man with kind eyes and an impressive mustache, took her hand. "No imposition at all, Miss Summers. That bridge has been trouble waiting to happen for years now. County Commissioner keeps promising to fix it." He shook his head. "You're welcome to stay here until you get your bearings. Martha," he called toward the house, "we've got a guest." A plump woman with graying hair pinned in a neat bun appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. "Goodness gracious, you poor dear, you're soaked through." Before Rebecca could respond, Martha had bustled down the porch steps and taken her arm. "Come along now. We'll get you into some dry clothes and a hot meal. Richard, have one of the boys prepare the guest room." Rebecca found herself ushered into the warm, inviting main house. As Martha led her upstairs, she glanced back to see Beau still standing in the yard, watching her with an unreadable expression. She offered a small smile of thanks, which he acknowledged with a nod before turning to lead his horse toward the stables. The guest room was small but comfortable, with a brass bed, a dresser, and a washstand. Martha returned shortly with a clean dress, slightly too large but serviceable. "This should do until your things dry," she said, laying the garment on the bed. "Though I gather from what Beau said that most of your possessions are currently floating down Canyon Creek." Rebecca nodded, fresh worry creasing her brow. "Everything I owned was in that wagon, my clothes, books, teaching materials. Even my letters of introduction to the Silver Creek Town Council." Martha clicked her tongue sympathetically. "Well, we'll just have to see what can be done. Richard knows folks in Silver Creek. He'll send word about what happened." She patted Rebecca's hand. "For now, get changed and come down for supper when you're ready. You've had quite a day, I imagine." Left alone, Rebecca changed into the borrowed dress, grateful for its dry warmth despite the ill fit. She splashed water on her face from the basin on the washstand and did her best to tidy her honey-brown hair, which had mostly escaped its pins during the ordeal. When she descended to the dining room, she found the Richardsons already seated, along with Beau and 2 other men who were introduced as the ranch foreman, Jake Miller, and Richard's son, Thomas. "Please sit," Richard said, gesturing to an empty chair beside Martha. "We were just about to say grace." The meal was simple but hearty: beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. The conversation flowed easily, with the Richardsons and their men showing a genuine interest in Rebecca's background and her plans for teaching in Silver Creek. "I've sent Thomas to town with a message for Sheriff Wilson," Richard informed her as they finished their meal. "He'll relay word to Silver Creek about your situation. I expect we'll hear back in a day or two." "I can't thank you enough for your kindness," Rebecca said. "I promise I won't be a burden for long." "Nonsense," Martha replied firmly. "You'll stay until proper arrangements can be made. Besides, it's nice having another woman around. Too many men on this ranch by far." This prompted chuckles from the men at the table. Beau, Rebecca noticed, had been mostly quiet throughout the meal, though she occasionally caught him watching her with those thoughtful blue eyes. After dinner, while Martha and Rebecca washed the dishes, the ranch owner's wife asked gently, "Do you have family back east who might help you, dear?" Rebecca shook her head. "No, it was just my father and me after my mother died when I was 12. I sold everything to purchase the wagon and supplies for the journey." She bit her lip. "I had just enough left over to see me through until my first month's salary as a teacher." Martha squeezed her shoulder. "Well, you're not alone now. We'll figure something out." Later that evening, unable to sleep despite her exhaustion, Rebecca stepped out onto the porch. The night was clear, the sky ablaze with stars unlike any she'd seen back east. She wrapped the shawl Martha had lent her more tightly around her shoulders, breathing in the unfamiliar scents of sage and distant pine. "Couldn't sleep," the quiet voice startled her. Beau emerged from the shadows at the far end of the porch, a rolled cigarette in his hand. "No," she admitted. "Too much thinking," he nodded, leaning against the porch railing a respectful distance away. "It's a lot to take in. I keep seeing that bridge collapsing," Rebecca said softly. "If you hadn't been there." "But I was," Beau replied simply. He took a final draw on his cigarette before extinguishing it carefully. "The bridge has been rickety for years. I should have warned you when I first saw your wagon approaching, but I was too far away." "You were watching me." Beau's teeth flashed white in the darkness as he smiled. "I was riding fence along the eastern pasture, saw you from the ridgeline." He paused. "You looked determined, driving that wagon like you'd been doing it all your life." "My father taught me," Rebecca said, a fond smile touching her lips at the memory. "He believed women should be self-sufficient." "Wise man." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, gazing at the stars. "What will you do now?" Beau finally asked. Rebecca sighed. "I don't know, without my teaching materials or even my letter of appointment, and no money to replace what was lost." She trailed off, the magnitude of her situation washing over her anew. "Silver Creek needs a schoolteacher," Beau said. "Been trying to get one for nearly a year now. They won't turn you away just because a bridge collapsed." His confidence was reassuring. "I hope you're right." "Get some rest, Miss Summers," he said, tipping his hat before heading toward the bunkhouse. "Things have a way of looking brighter in the morning." Rebecca watched him go, struck by the quiet strength that seemed to radiate from him. For the first time since the bridge had given way beneath her wagon, she felt a flicker of hope that perhaps all was not lost. The next morning, Rebecca woke to the sounds of the ranch coming to life, men calling to one another, horses nickering, the clang of the breakfast bell. She dressed quickly in her now dry traveling clothes and made her way downstairs. Martha was in the kitchen, frying bacon and flipping biscuits. "Good morning, dear. Did you sleep well?" "Better than I expected," Rebecca admitted, accepting the cup of coffee Martha handed her. "Is there anything I can do to help?" "You can set the table if you like. The men eat in the bunkhouse, but Richard and Thomas take breakfast here." As they worked together preparing the morning meal, Martha told Rebecca more about the ranch and the surrounding area. The Triple R had been in Richard's family for 20 years, one of the first established in this part of Montana Territory. Silver Creek had grown from a tiny mining settlement to a respectable small town over the past decade, with a general store, a hotel, a bank, and yes, a schoolhouse. "It's a nice little community," Martha said. "Decent folk for the most part. You would have liked it there." "Would have?" Rebecca questioned. Martha looked up from the skillet. "Well, I just thought, with your things gone." "I still intend to take the teaching position," Rebecca said firmly. Somehow, Martha smiled approvingly. "That's the spirit. Breakfast was another hearty meal, with Richard and Thomas discussing ranch business while they ate. Afterward, Richard offered to show Rebecca around the property. "You're welcome to rest, of course," he said. "But I thought you might like to see a bit of the operation." "I would, thank you," Rebecca replied, grateful for the distraction. As they walked the grounds, Rebecca was impressed by the well-organized ranch. Cattle grazed in the distance, cowboys worked with horses in the corral, and everywhere was evidence of hard work and care. "You run a fine establishment, Mr. Richardson," she commented. Richard beamed with pride. "Been building it up for 2 decades now. Started with just 20 head of cattle in this house." He gestured around them. "Now we run over 2,000 head and employ 15 men year-round." They approached the corral where several cowboys were breaking a spirited black gelding. Beau was among them, sitting atop the fence, calling out instructions to a young wrangler in the ring. "Ease up on those reins, Jimmy. Let him know who's boss, but don't hurt him." He noticed Rebecca and Richard approaching and tipped his hat in greeting before turning his attention back to the training session. Rebecca found herself watching the way he moved, confident but never arrogant, respectful of both the men and the animals under his guidance. "Beau's my right hand," Richard said, following her gaze. "Been with us since he was 20, best horseman in 3 counties and a natural leader. The men respect him." "He saved my life yesterday," Rebecca said quietly. "I never properly thanked him." Richard smiled knowingly. "Beau's not one for grand gestures or flowery thanks, but I'm sure he'd appreciate hearing it all the same." They continued their tour, visiting the blacksmith's forge, the storage barns, and the vegetable garden Martha tended behind the main house. By midday, Rebecca was tired but grateful for the activity that had kept her mind occupied. As they returned to the house for the noon meal, a rider approached at a gallop, raising dust on the road from town. "That's Thomas," Richard said, shading his eyes. "Back sooner than expected." Thomas dismounted with news. The sheriff had sent a telegram to Silver Creek explaining Rebecca's situation. The town council had replied that they still needed a teacher desperately and would hold the position for her, but they couldn't offer any advance on her salary to replace her lost belongings. "They said the schoolhouse has some basic teaching materials," Thomas reported as they sat around the dinner table. "Left by the previous teacher, but they can't help with personal items or transportation to town." Rebecca's heart sank. Even if she made it to Silver Creek, how would she survive until her first month's pay without clothes, personal necessities, or a place to stay? "I have an idea," Beau spoke up unexpectedly. All eyes turned to him. "The spring cattle drive to Helena starts next week. We'll be passing within 5 miles of Silver Creek. Miss Summers could travel with us, and we could deliver her to the town on our way." Richard considered this. It's not the most comfortable way to travel for a lady, but it would solve the transportation problem. "I don't mind discomfort," Rebecca said quickly. "I've already imposed on your hospitality far too much." "That's settled then," Richard declared. "Rebecca will travel with the cattle drive. As for your other needs," he exchanged a look with Martha, "we might be able to help with that too." That afternoon, Martha led Rebecca to a storage room off the main house. Inside were trunks and boxes, carefully preserved. "These belong to our daughter, Caroline," Martha explained, opening a trunk to reveal neatly folded dresses, blouses, and skirts. "She married a banker in Helena 3 years ago, left most of her things here, said she wanted a fresh start in the city." "Oh, I couldn't possibly," Rebecca began. "Nonsense," Martha interrupted gently. "They're just gathering dust here. Caroline gets her new clothes made by a fancy dressmaker now." She held up a blue calico dress. "These are practical, well-made garments, perfect for a schoolteacher, and you're about the same size Caroline was." Tears welled in Rebecca's eyes at this unexpected kindness. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." Martha patted her hand. "You just teach those children well, that's payment enough." By the end of the afternoon, Rebecca had acquired not only a modest wardrobe, but also some basic personal items, a small trunk to pack them in, and even a few books from the Richardsons' personal library that might be useful for teaching. That evening, as the ranch hands gathered around a fire outside the bunkhouse, Martha encouraged Rebecca to join them. "The boys are putting on a bit of music tonight. It's nothing fancy, but it might lift your spirits." Indeed, several of the cowboys had instruments: a fiddle, a harmonica, a banjo, and even a beaten-up accordion. They played with surprising skill, filling the cool evening air with lively tunes. Some of the men danced with each other, laughing and stomping in time to the music. Rebecca sat beside Martha, clapping along and smiling at the unexpected entertainment. She noticed Beau sitting slightly apart from the others, watching the proceedings with a small smile. When their eyes met across the fire, he gave her a nod but made no move to join her. Later, as the music wound down and the men began to drift back to the bunkhouse, Rebecca finally found an opportunity to approach him. "Mr. Blackwell," she said, "I never properly thanked you for saving my life yesterday." Beau looked slightly uncomfortable with the direct acknowledgement. "Anyone would have done the same, but it wasn't anyone, it was you." She met his gaze steadily. "And I'm also grateful for your suggestion about the cattle drive. It seems you're determined to see me safely to Silver Creek." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Just doing my part, Miss Summers." "Rebecca," she corrected. "After pulling someone from a collapsing bridge, I think you've earned the right to use my given name." He studied her for a moment, the firelight casting his features in a warm glow. "Rebecca," he said finally, as if testing the sound of it. "Then I suppose you should call me Beau." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the distant sound of an owl. "Have you ever been on a cattle drive before?" he asked eventually. Rebecca laughed. "I think you know the answer to that." "It's hard work," he warned. "Long days in the saddle, sleeping on the ground, eating trail food, not exactly what a lady from Springfield would be used to." "I'm tougher than I look," she replied, "and I'm not afraid of hard work." Beau nodded, a new respect in his eyes. "I believe you." "Still, it won't be easy." "Few worthwhile things are," Rebecca said softly. He looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his expression. "No," he agreed, "they rarely are." The week leading up to the cattle drive passed quickly. Rebecca made herself useful around the ranch, helping Martha with household chores and even assisting the cook, an elderly Chinese man named Lin, with meal preparation for the ranch hands. She also spent time with Beau, who took it upon himself to teach her the basics of Western riding. The Richardsons had gifted her an older but reliable mare named Penny for the journey to Silver Creek. "Sit deeper in the saddle," Beau instructed as they rode around the corral. "Let your hips move with the horse. That's it." Rebecca concentrated on following his guidance, determined to master these skills before the drive began. Growing up in the city, she'd had little experience with horses beyond her father's occasional buggy. "You're a quick study," Beau remarked after their third lesson, when she'd successfully guided Penny through a series of simple maneuvers. "I have a good teacher," she replied with a smile. As the days passed, Rebecca found herself looking forward to these riding lessons more than she cared to admit. There was something about Beau's quiet confidence and patience that drew her to him. He never spoke down to her or treated her as if she were fragile, despite her city upbringing. The night before the cattle drive was set to begin, the entire ranch gathered for a special dinner. Martha had outdone herself, preparing roast beef, mashed potatoes, fresh vegetables from her garden, and 3 different pies for dessert. "It's tradition," she explained to Rebecca as they set the long tables that had been arranged in the yard. "The last good meal before 3 weeks of beans and hardtack." The atmosphere was festive, with the men in high spirits in anticipation of the drive. After dinner, Thomas brought out his fiddle again and spontaneous dancing broke out in the yard. Rebecca watched from the sidelines, enjoying the camaraderie when Beau appeared beside her. "May I have this dance?" he asked, offering his hand. Surprised but pleased, Rebecca accepted. His hand was warm and calloused as it closed around hers, and he led her with unexpected grace into the circle of dancers. The tune was a lively reel, requiring them to skip and turn in time with the music. "I didn't know cowboys could dance," she teased as they came together after a particularly complicated series of steps. "There's a lot you don't know about cowboys," he replied with a rare grin that transformed his usually serious face. They danced 2 more sets before both were breathless and laughing. As they stepped away from the dancers to catch their breath, Rebecca became aware of Martha watching them with an expression of maternal satisfaction. "I think we're being match-made," she murmured to Beau. He followed her gaze and chuckled. "Martha tries to pair off every unattached person who crosses her path. Don't take it personally." "And does she succeed?" Rebecca asked, suddenly curious about his past. "Not with me," he said simply. Something in his tone discouraged further questions. The next morning dawned clear and cool, perfect weather for the start of the drive. The entire ranch was in motion before sunrise, cowboys saddling horses, checking equipment, and moving the cattle into position. The herd, nearly 1,000 strong, stretched across the valley floor, a sea of brown and black against the green spring grass. Rebecca, dressed in the practical riding clothes Martha had altered for her, secured her few possessions in the saddlebags on Penny's flanks. The small trunk with Caroline's dresses would travel in one of the supply wagons. Richard and Martha came to see her off, both offering warm embraces. "You take care now," Martha said, pressing a package of freshly baked cookies into Rebecca's hands. "And don't let those cowhands give you any trouble. She'll be fine," Richard assured his wife. "Beau will look after her." As if summoned by his name, Beau rode up on his chestnut stallion. "Ready, Miss Summers?" he asked formally, aware of the Richardsons' presence. "Ready, Mr. Blackwell," she replied with equal formality, though a smile tugged at her lips. With final farewells, Rebecca mounted Penny and followed Beau toward the gathered herd. The other cowboys greeted her with respectful nods, though she could sense curiosity in their glances. It wasn't every day that a woman joined a cattle drive. "You'll ride with me at the front of the herd," Beau explained. "The trail boss usually takes the lead position. Jimmy and Miguel will handle the point, turning the leaders. The rest of the men will work the sides and rear." Rebecca nodded, taking in the information. "And what will I do?" "For now, stay close and learn," Beau said. "Once you're comfortable, you can help with camp duties. Lynn could use an extra hand with meals." The drive began with organized chaos, cowboys shouting, cattle lowing, horses trotting into position. Dust rose as the herd began to move, a living river flowing across the landscape. Rebecca watched in fascination as the cowboys expertly guided the cattle forward, working in perfect coordination despite minimal verbal communication. By midday, her muscles were already protesting the unaccustomed activity. Beau noticed her shifting uncomfortably in the saddle. "First day's the hardest," he said. "Your body will adjust." "I'm fine," Rebecca insisted, straightening her posture. Beau's eyes crinkled at the corners. "Stubborn, aren't you?" "Determined," she corrected. That night they made camp along a small creek. The cattle settled into a rough circle, with riders taking shifts to guard them through the night. Lynn set up his chuck wagon and soon had coffee boiling and beans simmering in a large pot. Rebecca dismounted stiffly, her legs trembling from the long day in the saddle. She tried not to show her discomfort as she led Penny to the makeshift corral the men had constructed. "Let me help you with that," Beau offered, appearing at her side to take the mare's reins. "You should rest. First day's always the toughest." Too tired to argue, Rebecca gratefully sank onto a log near the campfire. Lynn handed her a tin cup of strong coffee, which she accepted with thanks. The cowboys gradually gathered around the fire as their duties were completed, accepting plates of beans, bacon, and biscuits from Lynn. They were more subdued than they had been at the ranch, tired from the day's work but satisfied with their progress. Rebecca ate hungrily, surprised at her appetite. The simple food tasted better than any fine restaurant meal she'd had back east. After dinner, as the men smoked and talked quietly, one of the younger cowboys brought out a harmonica and began to play a melancholy tune. The sweet, sad notes drifted up to the star-filled sky, oddly fitting for the vast, empty landscape surrounding them. Rebecca was just beginning to doze where she sat when Beau touched her shoulder gently. "You should get some sleep," he said. "I've set up your bedroll a bit away from the men for privacy." He led her to a spot where a canvas ground cloth had been laid out, with a bedroll on top and a saddle positioned as a pillow. A short distance away, she could see where the other cowboys would sleep, all in a rough circle around the fire. "Thank you," she said, suddenly self-conscious about the sleeping arrangements. She had never spent a night outdoors before, let alone surrounded by a dozen men she barely knew. Sensing her unease, Beau pointed to another bedroll a few yards from hers. "I'll be right there if you need anything. And Johnson will be keeping first watch on the herd." He indicated an older cowboy sitting on a rock nearby, rifle across his knees. Rebecca nodded, relieved. "Good night, then." "Good night, Rebecca." He hesitated, then added, "You did well today." Not many city folk would have handled their first day on a cattle drive so gracefully. His approval warmed her more than it should have. "Thank you, though I suspect I'll be quite sore tomorrow," Beau chuckled. "Without a doubt, but it gets easier." He left her then, returning to the fire where the other men were settling in for the night. Rebecca removed her boots and outer jacket before sliding into the bedroll fully clothed. Despite the hard ground beneath her and the strange sounds of the night, exhaustion soon claimed her, and she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. The next days fell into a rhythm: up before dawn, coffee and breakfast by firelight, long hours in the saddle moving the herd across the rugged terrain. True to Beau's prediction, Rebecca's body gradually adjusted to the demands of the trail. The soreness in her muscles faded, replaced by a new strength and resilience. She found herself enjoying the simple routine and the camaraderie that developed among the drovers. The men, initially reserved around her, gradually accepted her presence, especially after she began helping Lynn with meal preparations and proved herself willing to work as hard as any of them. Beau remained a constant presence, never hovering but always nearby, ready with advice or assistance when needed. Rebecca found herself watching him when he wasn't looking the easy way he sat a horse, the quiet authority with which he directed the men, the rare smile that transformed his weathered face. On the fifth night, as they camped by a small stream, a spring storm blew in suddenly. The temperature dropped and rain began to fall in sheets, turning the ground to mud within minutes. The cattle grew restless, shifting nervously as lightning flashed across the sky. The cowboys rushed to secure the herd, afraid the animals might stampede in the storm. Rebecca huddled under the minimal shelter of the chuck wagon's canvas, helping Lynn protect the food supplies. Through the curtain of rain, she could see Beau and the other men riding around the perimeter of the herd, their slickers shining wetly in the occasional lightning flashes. A particularly loud thunderclap directly overhead spooked the cattle. Rebecca watched in horror as several animals at the edge of the herd began to run, threatening to start a full stampede. Without thinking, she grabbed a slicker hanging from the wagon, threw it on, and ran to where Penny was tethered. Ignoring Lynn's shouts, she mounted and rode toward the increasingly agitated herd. She reached the far side just as Beau and two other cowboys were struggling to turn the leaders back. Rebecca joined them, riding alongside the frightened animals, helping to guide them back toward the main herd. The rain was blinding, the ground treacherous with mud, but Rebecca focused on the task, following Beau's shouted instructions. For nearly an hour they worked to calm the cattle, riding through the downpour until the storm finally began to abate and the herd settled. As they rode back to camp soaked and exhausted, Beau pulled his horse alongside hers. "That was either the bravest or the most foolish thing I've ever seen," he said, his voice a mixture of admiration and exasperation. "You could have been trampled." "You needed help," Rebecca replied simply. "I couldn't just watch." Beau studied her through the diminishing rain, water dripping from the brim of his hat. "You're full of surprises, Rebecca Summers." Back at camp, everyone worked to salvage what they could from the storm's damage. Fortunately, Lynn had protected most of the food, and the bedrolls had been quickly covered with oilcloth when the rain began. Still, everything was damp, and the ground was a muddy mess. Rebecca helped Lynn prepare a simple meal of jerky and hardtack, as it was impossible to light a fire with everything so wet. The men ate quickly and silently, too tired for conversation. As she finished her meager dinner, Rebecca realized her bedroll would be too sodden for sleeping. She was contemplating how to solve this problem when Beau approached, carrying an oilskin bundle. "My bedroll stayed mostly dry," he said. "You should take it, I can sleep under the wagon." "I couldn't take your bed," Rebecca protested. "You need rest more than I do," he insisted. "Besides, after what you did tonight, it's the least I can offer." When she continued to hesitate, he added more gently, "Please, Rebecca, let me do this for you." Something in his voice made her relent. "Thank you," she said softly. As she settled into his bedroll that night, she could detect the faint scent of him on the blanket's leather, tobacco, and something uniquely Beau. It was oddly comforting in the damp, chilly night. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. She found herself thinking about the man sleeping uncomfortably under the wagon nearby, his quiet strength, his unfailing kindness, the way his eyes sometimes lingered on her when he thought she wasn't looking. It was dangerous thinking. In a week or so, they would reach Silver Creek, and she would begin her new life as a schoolteacher. Beau would continue on to Helena with the cattle drive and then return to the Triple R. Their paths would diverge, likely never to cross again. Yet she couldn't deny the growing attraction she felt toward him, or the suspicion that he might feel something similar for her. It was there in the small gestures a hand offered to help her mount, a cup of coffee brought to her before she'd even risen in the morning, the way he'd positioned his bedroll near hers each night, protective yet respectful. Rebecca turned over, punching the saddle that served as her pillow. She was being foolish. A few days of shared hardship didn't constitute a romance, and even if there were feelings developing, what future could there be? She was committed to teaching, and Beau's life was on the ranch. Still, as she finally drifted toward sleep, her last conscious thought was of blue eyes crinkling at the corners and a rare, transformative smile. The next morning dawned clear, the storm having blown itself out during the night. The ground was still muddy, but the sun promised to dry things quickly. The cattle, recovered from their fright, grazed peacefully as the cowboys prepared for another day on the trail. Rebecca rose early, determined to return Beau's bedroll before he awoke. But he was already up, helping Lynn with the breakfast fire. "Sleep well?" he asked as she approached, bedroll in arms. "Better than you did, I imagine," she replied, noting the dark circles under his eyes. "Thank you for the loan of your bed." He took the rolled bundle from her, their hands brushing briefly. "My pleasure." Over the next several days, the cattle drive continued its steady progress westward. The landscape changed gradually, the open prairie giving way to more varied terrain with scattered pine forests and rocky outcroppings. Game was plentiful, and occasionally one of the men would bring down a deer or wild turkey to supplement their diet of beans and salt pork. Rebecca found herself settling into the routine with surprising ease. Her confidence on horseback grew daily, and she took pride in being able to contribute to the camp duties. More than once, she caught Beau watching her with approval as she mastered a new skill or completed a difficult task without complaint. Their conversations, initially limited to practical matters, gradually deepened. During the quiet evenings around the campfire, Beau told her stories of his childhood in Montana Territory, his father, a trapper who had married a Boston schoolteacher who'd come west seeking adventure. "She taught me to read and write," he said one night as they sat slightly apart from the other men, "made sure I knew Shakespeare and Dickens alongside tracking and hunting." "She sounds remarkable," Rebecca said. "Are your parents still living?" A shadow crossed his face. "No. Lost them both to influenza when I was 16. I made my way after that, working ranches wherever I could find employment. The Triple R is the first place that felt like home since then." Rebecca touched his arm gently. "I'm sorry, I know how it feels to lose family." He covered her hand with his own for a brief moment. "I know you do." In turn, Rebecca shared stories of her life in Springfield, her father's devotion to education, the small house near the school where she'd grown up, her dreams of making a difference through teaching. Why Silver Creek? Beau asked. You could have taught anywhere. Rebecca considered the question. I wanted a fresh start somewhere far from the memories, and there was something about the advertisement teacher wanted for growing community must be independent and resourceful that spoke to me. She smiled ruefully. Though I'm not sure losing everything I owned in a bridge collapse was quite the test of resourcefulness I had in mind. You've handled it better than most would, Beau said, his voice warm with admiration. As the days passed, Rebecca became increasingly aware of a growing tension between them, a pleasant tension, like a string pulled taut but not yet snapped. It was in the lingering glances, the casual touches that seemed to last a moment longer than necessary, the way they gravitated toward each other around the campfire each night. Neither spoke of it directly, but Rebecca sensed that Beau felt it too. Once, when helping her mount Penny in the morning, his hands remained at her waist a heartbeat longer than needed, and she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. But always, there was the unspoken reality between them. Silver Creek was approaching, and with it, the end of their time together. On the 12th day of the drive, as they crested a rise, Beau pointed to a distant cluster of buildings nestled in a valley. Silver Creek, he said. We should reach it by tomorrow afternoon. Rebecca's heart gave an odd little lurch, part excitement at finally reaching her destination, part dismay that her journey with Beau was nearing its end. So soon, she murmured. He glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. We've made good time. The weather's been kind since that one storm. That night, the camp was more subdued than usual. The men were tired from pushing the herd a bit harder to stay on schedule, and tomorrow would bring the brief detour to Silver Creek before continuing on to Helena. Rebecca sat by the fire long after most of the men had turned in, watching the flames dance and trying to sort through her conflicted feelings. She was startled when Beau sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. Nervous about tomorrow? He asked quietly. A bit, she admitted. It's one thing to dream about starting a new life, another to actually do it. You'll do fine, he said with confidence. Those children will be lucky to have you as their teacher. Thank you. She hesitated, then asked the question that had been on her mind. Will you? That is, do you ever pass through Silver Creek on ranch business? Beau poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks flying upward. Sometimes, not often, he paused. Would you want me to visit? Rebecca's heart quickened. I would like that very much. He turned to look at her fully, the firelight playing across his features. I'm not an educated man, Rebecca, not like you. You're one of the most intelligent men I've ever known, she countered. Education isn't just about books. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Still, a schoolteacher and a cowboy, people would talk. Let them, Rebecca said with more boldness than she felt. I've never much cared what people think. Beau's gaze dropped to her lips, and for a moment Rebecca thought he might kiss her. But then someone coughed nearby, reminding them they weren't truly alone, and the moment passed. We should get some sleep, Beau said, rising to his feet. Tomorrow will be a long day. Rebecca nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. Good night, Beau. Good night, Rebecca. The next morning brought a flurry of activity as they prepared for the day's journey. Rebecca packed her few belongings carefully, including the dresses from Martha that had been traveling in the supply wagon. Her emotions were a tangle of excitement and anxiety about reaching Silver Creek, mixed with sadness at the thought of saying goodbye to Beau and the others. As they rode toward town, Beau brought his horse alongside hers. Thomas sent word ahead about your arrival, he said. The town council should be expecting you. I'm grateful for that, Rebecca replied. At least I won't have to explain everything from scratch. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the cattle drive stretched out behind them, moving at a steady pace. What will you do after delivering the herd to Helena? Rebecca asked finally. Head back to the Triple R, Beau replied. There's always work to be done on a ranch. He glanced at her. The autumn cattle drive passes closer to Silver Creek, usually in late September. Rebecca's heart lifted at the implied promise. I'll remember that. Silver Creek appeared before them as they rounded a bend in the trail, a tidy collection of wooden buildings along a main street, with houses scattered on the surrounding hillsides. It was smaller than Springfield, of course, but larger than Rebecca had expected, with a church steeple rising above the other structures and several substantial-looking businesses. As they rode into town, people stopped to stare at the unusual sight, a cattle drive passing through, with a woman riding alongside the trail boss. Beau led them to the town square, where a group of men in suits stood waiting. "That'll be the town council," he murmured to Rebecca. "Ready." She straightened her shoulders and nodded. "Ready." Beau helped her dismount, then introduced himself to the waiting men. "Beau Blackwell, trail boss for the Triple R. I believe you're expecting Miss Rebecca Summers, your new schoolteacher." A portly man with impressive whiskers stepped forward. "Mayor George Wilson, indeed we are." He turned to Rebecca with a polite bow. "Miss Summers, welcome to Silver Creek. We received word of your unfortunate accident at Canyon Creek, a terrible business." "Thank you, Mayor Wilson," Rebecca replied, shaking his hand. "I'm very pleased to finally arrive, despite the circumstances." The mayor introduced the other council members, then a woman stepped forward from behind them, a handsome matron in her 50s with graying hair and kind eyes. "This is Mrs. Abigail Foster," the mayor explained. "She's offered to provide you with lodging until you get settled. The schoolteacher's cottage is, well, it needs some work before it's habitable." "We're so pleased you've come," Mrs. Foster said warmly, taking Rebecca's hands in hers. "The children have been without proper schooling for nearly 6 months now." As the introductions continued, Rebecca was acutely aware of Beau standing slightly behind her, silent but supportive. When the mayor suggested they show her the schoolhouse immediately, she glanced back at him uncertainly. "You go ahead," Beau said, understanding her unspoken question. "I need to get back to the herd. We're losing daylight." The practical statement masked the emotion she could see in his eyes. "This was goodbye, at least for now. Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." Beau removed his hat, a gesture of respect that touched her deeply. "It was my honor, Miss Summers." He turned to the mayor. "Sir, I've brought Miss Summers this far. I'd consider it a personal favor if the town would ensure she has everything she needs to start her teaching duties." "Of course, Mr. Blackwell," the mayor assured him. "Silver Creek takes care of its own, and Miss Summers is one of us now." Beau nodded, satisfied. He looked at Rebecca one last time, something unspoken passing between them, then mounted his horse and rode back toward the waiting cattle drive. Rebecca watched him go, a complicated mix of emotions churning within her. Then, squaring her shoulders, she turned to face her new life in Silver Creek. The schoolhouse stood at the edge of town, a simple one-room building with rows of rough-hewn desks and a pot-bellied stove in one corner. A chalkboard occupied most of the front wall, and bookshelves sadly sparse lined the back. Large windows let in plenty of light, though several panes were cracked or missing. "It's not much," Mayor Wilson admitted as they toured the space, "but it's solid, built just 5 years ago." "It's perfect," Rebecca said, already envisioning how she would arrange things, what lessons she would teach. "How many students can I expect?" 28 at last count," replied Mrs. Foster. "Ages 6 to 16. Some can only attend seasonally when their families don't need them for farming or ranching work." The town council had indeed prepared for her arrival as best they could. Basic teaching supplies, chalk, slates, a few textbooks were stacked on the teacher's desk. And as promised, the previous teacher had left behind some instructional materials, though they were outdated and well-worn. "School traditionally starts the first Monday in September," the mayor explained, "but given the circumstances, we'd be grateful if you could begin sooner." "Perhaps in 2 weeks. Give you time to settle in and prepare." "I can do that," Rebecca agreed. From the schoolhouse, they walked to Mrs. Foster's home, a tidy 2-story house near the church. Inside, it was comfortably furnished and immaculately kept. "You'll stay in my daughter's old room," Mrs. Foster said, showing Rebecca upstairs. "She married a doctor in Bozeman 2 years ago." The room was small but pleasant, with a narrow bed, a dresser, and a rocking chair by the window. Fresh flowers stood in a vase on the bedside table, a thoughtful touch that brought tears to Rebecca's eyes after weeks on the trail. "This is lovely," she said sincerely. "You're very kind to take in a stranger," Mrs. Foster smiled. "Hardly a stranger. Richard and Martha Richardson wrote glowingly of you in their telegram." She paused. "And that young man who brought you here, Mr. Blackwell, he seems quite concerned for your welfare." Rebecca felt a blush creep into her cheeks. "He saved my life at Canyon Creek and was very helpful during the journey here." Mrs. Foster's eyes twinkled knowingly, but she didn't press the matter. "Well, I'll let you get settled. Dinner is at 6. Left alone, Rebecca unpacked her few belongings, hanging the dresses Martha had given her in the small wardrobe. It felt strange to be in a proper room again after so many nights under the stars. The bed, with its clean sheets and soft quilt, looked impossibly luxurious after her bedroll on the hard ground. Yet as she stood by the window, looking out at the bustling little town that would be her new home, her thoughts kept drifting back to Beau to the cattle drive, continuing its journey without her, to campfires and conversations under starlit skies, to blue eyes that seemed to see deeper than anyone had ever looked before. "September," she whispered to herself. "He said he'd be back in September." The next weeks passed in a blur of activity as Rebecca prepared for the start of school. The town rallied around her with unexpected generosity. Once word spread about her lost possessions, donations appeared: books for the schoolhouse, fabric for new clothes, small personal items to replace what had been lost in Canyon Creek. Mrs. Foster proved to be not only a kind landlady but also a valuable ally. As the minister's widow, she knew everyone in town and introduced Rebecca around, helping her establish relationships with the parents of her future students. The schoolteacher's cottage, as warned, needed substantial work. Years of neglect had left it drafty and dilapidated. But here, too, the community stepped up. Men from town volunteered their time on weekends to replace the roof and fix the windows, while their wives helped clean and furnish the small 2-room structure. Through it all, Rebecca threw herself into preparations for teaching. She organized the sparse materials available, developed lesson plans for students of varying ages and abilities, and even began a small garden behind the schoolhouse where she hoped to teach the children about plants and natural science. The work kept her busy, but in quiet moments, evenings in her room at Mrs. Foster's, or early mornings when she walked alone to the schoolhouse, thoughts of Beau would surface. She wondered where he was, if the cattle drive had reached Helena, whether he thought of her as often as she thought of him. On the day school was to begin, Rebecca rose before dawn, too excited and nervous to sleep. She dressed carefully in one of the dresses Martha had given her, a pretty blue calico that Mrs. Foster had altered to fit her perfectly. She pinned her hair in a neat bun, as befitted a schoolteacher, and gathered the materials she'd prepared for the first day's lessons. Mrs. Foster insisted on walking with her to the schoolhouse, carrying a basket with lunch for both of them. "The children will be nervous too," she assured Rebecca. "First days are always a bit chaotic." They arrived to find several students already waiting outside, accompanied by parents eager to meet the new teacher. Rebecca greeted each child by name. She'd memorized the school roster and welcomed them inside. By 8 o'clock, the schoolhouse was full of children ranging from tiny 6-year-olds to gangly teenagers. They sat at the desks, eyeing her with curiosity and varying degrees of enthusiasm. Rebecca took a deep breath and rang the small bell on her desk. "Good morning, students. I'm Miss Summers, and I'm very pleased to be your new teacher." The day flew by in a whirlwind of assessments, introductions, and establishing routines. Some of the older boys tested her authority as she'd expected, but she met their challenges with firm kindness. By the end of the day, when the last student had departed, Rebecca collapsed into her chair with a mixture of exhaustion and satisfaction. "You did wonderfully," Mrs. Foster said, having returned to help clean up. "I heard Thomas Jenkins actually answered a question voluntarily. That boy hasn't spoken in class in years." Rebecca smiled, too tired to respond but pleased by the small victory. Days turned into weeks as Rebecca settled into her role as Silver Creek schoolteacher. The work was challenging but rewarding. She discovered a genuine talent for reaching difficult students, and took particular pleasure in encouraging the girls to pursue subjects traditionally reserved for boys. The cottage was finally ready for habitation in early October, and Rebecca moved in with mixed feelings. She would miss Mrs. Foster's company, but she looked forward to having her own space. The cottage was simple but comfortable now, with a bedroom, a small sitting room that doubled as a kitchen, and a front porch perfect for summer evenings. The seasons began to change, summer's heat giving way to crisp autumn days. Leaves turned golden on the cottonwoods along the creek, and morning frost sparkled on the schoolhouse steps. Rebecca found herself watching the trail from Helena more often, remembering Beau's mention of the autumn cattle drive. Then one afternoon in late October, as Rebecca was dismissing her students for the day, a commotion outside drew their attention. A cattle drive was passing at the edge of town, hundreds of animals moving in a coordinated mass, guided by mounted cowboys. The children rushed to the windows, excitement overwhelming their usual end-of-day decorum. "Can we go see, Miss Summers?" pleaded young Sally Jenkins. Rebecca hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Yes, but stay together and listen for my instructions." They hurried outside and up the small hill behind the schoolhouse, which offered a view of the trail. Rebecca scanned the riders, her heart quickening when she spotted a familiar chestnut stallion and the man atop it. Beau was directing the operation from horseback, pointing and occasionally calling out instructions that were inaudible at this distance. He looked much as she remembered, strong, capable, perfectly at home in the saddle. Then, as if sensing her gaze, he turned and looked directly toward the hill where she stood surrounded by her students. Even from a distance, she could see his posture change as he recognized her. After a moment's hesitation, he spoke to one of the other riders, then turned his horse toward the hill, riding at an unhurried pace that nevertheless conveyed purpose. "Children," Rebecca said, struggling to keep her voice steady, "this is an excellent opportunity to learn about cattle drives. Let's be very respectful and quiet while the trail boss answers our questions." As Beau approached, the children fell silent, awed by the imposing figure he cut on horseback. He stopped a few yards away and dismounted, removing his hat as he walked toward them. "Miss Summers," he said with a formal nod that didn't quite mask the warmth in his eyes. "Teaching moment, Mr. Blackwell," she replied, equally formal though her pulse raced. Indeed, the children were curious about the cattle drive. For the next 15 minutes, Beau patiently answered the students' eager questions about life on the trail, how cattle were driven to market, and the challenges of the cowboy's life. He was surprisingly good with the children, crouching down to eye level with the youngest ones, and addressing even the silliest questions with seriousness. Rebecca watched him, a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the autumn sunshine. He was exactly as she remembered, yet somehow more, his voice deeper than she'd recalled, his smile more transformative, his presence more compelling. As the questions wound down, she reluctantly began gathering the children. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Blackwell. We should let you get back to your herd." "My pleasure, Miss Summers." He hesitated, then added, "Perhaps I could call on you this evening, to discuss educational opportunities related to ranching." Several of the older girls giggled, and Rebecca felt herself blushing. That would be acceptable. "I'm staying in the schoolteacher's cottage now, behind the schoolhouse." Beau nodded, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Until this evening, then." He mounted his horse and rode back to the cattle drive, but not before casting one more glance over his shoulder at Rebecca and her students. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. Rebecca sent the children home, then rushed to her cottage to prepare for Beau's visit. She changed into her best dress, a deep green that Martha had said brought out the color of her eyes, and attempted to tame her hair into a more becoming style than her usual severe schoolteacher's bun. She was just setting out cups for tea when a knock came at the door. Taking a deep breath to calm her racing heart, she opened it to find Beau standing on her porch, hat in hand. He'd clearly made an effort with his appearance, as well his clothes were clean, his hair neatly combed, and he'd even trimmed his beard. "Evening, Miss Summers," he said, his deep voice sending a pleasant shiver through her. Mr. Blackwell, she replied, stepping back to allow him entry. Please come in. The cottage suddenly seemed very small with his tall figure inside it. Beau looked around with interest, taking in the modest but homey space she'd created. It's nice, he said sincerely. Suits you? Thank you. Would you like some tea, or I have coffee if you prefer? Coffee would be welcome, he said. Been a long day on the trail. As Rebecca busied herself with the coffee pot on the small stove, a slightly awkward silence fell between them. There was so much she wanted to say, yet now that he was here, the words seemed inadequate. How was Helena? She asked finally, grasping for a safe topic. Same as always. Got a good price for the herd, he paused. How are you finding Silver Creek? It's becoming home, Rebecca replied, pouring the coffee into cups. The people have been very kind and I enjoy teaching. They sat at her small table, the domesticity of the scene striking after their previous encounters on the trail. Rebecca found herself studying his face, noting the new lines around his eyes, the slight tan that spoke of days in the sun. You look well, she said softly. As do you, he replied. Teaching agrees with you. Another silence, less awkward this time. Beau sipped his coffee, then set the cup down decisively. Rebecca, he began, his voice more serious. I've thought about you often. Her heart leaped. I've thought about you too. He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. I'm not good with words, not like you, but these past months, something's been missing, and it's you. Rebecca turned her hand to clasp his. I felt the same way. Beau's eyes, so blue and earnest, held hers. I don't know how this could work. My life is at the R, yours is here. We could figure it out, Rebecca said, surprised by her own boldness, if we wanted to. I want to, he said simply. The directness of his statement, the certainty in his voice took her breath away. So do I. Beau stood, still holding her hand, and drew her to her feet. They stood facing each other, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. I'm not an educated man, he said again, echoing his words from that night by the campfire. I can't offer you much. You saved my life, Rebecca interrupted gently. You showed me kindness when I had nothing. You're honorable and brave and good with children. She smiled up at him. That's everything that matters. Something shifted in his expression, a tension releasing. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Beau leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, almost hesitant, but when Rebecca responded by sliding her arms around his neck, it deepened into something more passionate. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer, and for a long moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them. When they finally parted, both breathless, Beau rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that since I pulled you off that collapsing bridge, Rebecca laughed softly. Even when I was soaking wet and terrified, especially then, he admitted with a smile. You looked so determined even in the face of disaster. I knew right then you were someone special. They spent the evening talking, planning, dreaming. The cattle drive would continue north tomorrow, but Beau promised to return in 2 weeks when his duties were complete. The R is only a day's ride, he pointed out. I could come on weekends, and perhaps, in time, we might find a more permanent arrangement. The implication made Rebecca blush, but she nodded. I'd like that. When it came time for him to leave, propriety demanded he not stay too late at an unmarried woman's home. They stood again on her porch, reluctant to part. 2 weeks, he promised, kissing her once more. I'll be waiting, she replied. True to his word, Beau returned exactly 2 weeks later, and the next weekend after that, and the next. Each visit strengthened the bond between them as they discovered more about each other and grew increasingly certain of their feelings. By Christmas, the entire town of Silver Creek had accepted Beau as Rebecca's suitor. He became a familiar figure at community events, sitting proudly in the audience at the school's Christmas pageant and attending Sunday services beside Rebecca when his visits coincided with the Sabbath. The R, understanding the situation, arranged for Beau to take on duties that required regular trips to Silver Creek. Richard and Martha, delighted by the match they'd inadvertently fostered, sent their blessings along with practical gifts for Rebecca's cottage. As winter thawed into spring, Rebecca stood one evening on the bridge over Silver Creek, a new, sturdy structure built the previous summer. Beau stood beside her, his arm around her waist as they watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "Hard to believe it's been nearly a year," she said, leaning against his solid warmth. "Since the day we met." "Best day of my life," Beau replied, pressing a kiss to her temple, "though I wouldn't recommend bridge collapses as a general way of meeting people." Rebecca laughed, turning in his arms to face him. "No, probably not." Beau's expression grew serious. "I have something to ask you, Rebecca." Her heart quickened as he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. Dropping to one knee on the bridge, he opened it to reveal a simple gold ring with a small pearl. "Rebecca Summers, I've loved you since I pulled you from that wagon. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears of happiness filled Rebecca's eyes. "Yes, Beau, yes, I will." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and swept her into an embrace that lifted her feet from the ground. Their laughter echoed across the water, carrying into the gathering dusk. They were married that June in the Silver Creek Church, with Martha and Richard Richardson making the journey to attend. The entire town turned out for the celebration, proud of their schoolteacher and her cowboy. The question of where they would live had been solved by a fortuitous opportunity. A small ranch bordering both Silver Creek and Triple R land had come up for sale. With Beau's savings and a loan from Richard, they had purchased it, allowing Beau to start his own modest cattle operation while Rebecca continued teaching. "Mrs. Blackwell," Beau murmured as they shared their first dance as husband and wife, "has a nice ring to it." "Indeed it does, Mr. Blackwell," Rebecca replied, her eyes shining with happiness. "Though my students will need time to adjust to the name change." "They'll manage," he said with a smile. "Smart kids with a teacher like you." As they danced beneath lanterns strung across the town square, Rebecca reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. What had seemed like disaster, the bridge collapsing beneath her wagon, had led to the greatest joy of her life. "What are you thinking?" Beau asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "That sometimes bridges need to fall for new ones to be built," she replied. He chuckled, pulling her closer. "That's my teacher wife, always finding the lesson in everything." "And what lesson did you learn, cowboy?" she teased. Beau's eyes grew serious, though his smile remained. "That some things are worth risking everything for." He brushed a gentle kiss across her lips. "And I'd drag you from 100 collapsing bridges if it meant ending up here, with you." As the stars emerged in the darkening sky above Silver Creek, Rebecca and Beau danced on, their journey together just beginning, a journey that had started with disaster but led to a love stronger than any bridge, capable of spanning any distance, and built to last a lifetime.